Hey, howdy, hey. Welcome back to another episode of Regenerative Farming News with me, Heather Heinrichs, a former journalist turned farmer turned passionate advocate for regenerative farming. In today's episode, we're looking at the debate around cover crops in dryland farming. Recent research out of Alberta raises concerns that there just isn't enough moisture to grow both a main crop and a cover crop. But my guest this week, Gavelin of Gavelin Farms in McCord, Saskatchewan, shares a very different story. Calvin explains how cover crops have actually revolutionized his farm, giving him more flexibility, healthier soils, and even improving his quality of life. The key for him? Something as simple but powerful as adjusting seeding depth. So in this episode, we'll contrast the cautious outlook of researchers with Calvin's lived experience on the prairies and explore how regenerative practices like cover cropping can succeed, even in low rainfall areas. If you're enjoying the podcast, please hit that follow button so you'll never miss an episode. Sharing it on your social media helps more people discover regenerative farming, and together we can make a real impact on our food systems. I'd also love to connect with you on Facebook or Instagram, where you can share your thoughts, ask questions, and suggest future topics. Let's dive in. In Ag News this week, I came across an article in Grain News titled Sustainable versus Regenerative Agriculture. The author makes a valuable point that regenerative agriculture is really about feeding the soil and putting nutrients back into it, and that is absolutely true. It's encouraging to see mainstream farm publications acknowledging that soil isn't just dirt, it's a living ecosystem that needs to be nurtured. But here's where the article really falls short. The author describes regenerative farming as, quote, basically chopping straw, end quote, and as putting back the phosphate, potash, sulfur, and micronutrients that we have been taking off the fields over the last 100 years. Now, there's nothing wrong with fertility planning. We know those nutrients matter. But framing regenerative agriculture as simply a balancing act of nutrients in versus nutrients out is a massive oversimplification. The author also makes another point worth unpacking. He rightly recognizes that farming has depleted prairie soils of nutrients over the past century. That's an important acknowledgement. He even notes that natural prairie systems were built by constant recycling, animals grazing, predators hunting, manure and urine returning nutrients, nothing wasted or hauled away. That's true. And it is one of the foundational insights of regenerative agriculture, that nature never leaves the soil bare and never lets nutrients escape the cycle. But then, the article turns around and claims that farmers began replacing those lost nutrients with concentrated crop nutrients, basically chemical fertilizers, about 50 years ago. And here's the problem with that logic. Fertilizer is not the same thing as nutrient cycling. Fertilizer is a band-aid. It might give you a crop response in the short term, but it doesn't build the biology or the soil structure that makes those nutrients stable, available, and long-lasting. Take his example of hog producers spreading manure and seeing their soils improve. Better structure, mellowed clays, higher yields. That's not just because nutrients were added. It's because manure brings in organic matter, microbes, and biology that actually regenerate soil function. Compare that to a bag of synthetic fertilizer. Fertilizer might feed the plant, but it doesn't feed the soil. Over time, relying only on concentrated nutrients without restoring carbon and biology leads to soils that are compacted, less resilient to drought, and more dependent on annual inputs. So yes, the author is right. Nutrient mining has been a huge problem on the prairies, but Saying the solution is just to replace those nutrients with chemical fertilizer misses the point entirely. Fertility isn't just a math equation, it's a living cycle. The real solution is to rebuild the ecosystem processes that hold nutrients in the soil, recycle them through the plants and animals, and build organic matter so that fertility grows naturally over time. And that ties back to another weak point in the article, his dismissal of the concept of soil health as, quote, nonsense, end quote. In reality, the hog manure example that he praised was exactly soil health in action. Improved tilth, higher organic matter, more biological activity, that's soil health. You can't deny it when you're standing in a field where the tractor pulls easier, the barley yields higher, and the soil crumbles in your hand instead of clotting up. True regenerative farming is about restoring those cycles and functions. Cover crops, diverse rotations, adaptive grazing, and reduced tillage all build soil structure and feed soil biology. That's what allows nutrients to cycle naturally, without constant dependence on synthetic inputs. Fertilizer might have been the stopgap that we've leaned on for the last 50 years, but it's not the foundation for the next 50. So yes, feeding the soil is the goal, but it's not just about topping up phosphate, potash, and sulfur. And it is certainly not nonsense to talk about soil health. It's the foundation of farming. Regenerative agriculture is about reviving the entire ecosystem so that fertility builds itself year after year without the treadmill of high input dependency. This article makes me excited to share my guest this week, Gavelin, a regenerative farmer from McCord, Saskatchewan. Calvin has been putting these principles into action every day on his operation, proving that soil health is not only real, it's measurable, and it's transformative. He has seen firsthand how building biology in the soil reduces input needs, increases resilience, and creates a more profitable, sustainable farm. We will dive into that conversation soon and hear directly from Calvin. But first, there's a bit more news to cover. A recent article in the Western Producer titled, quote, Alberta Research Group takes a look at cover crops, end quote, highlights field trials by Farming Smarter near Lethbridge. The research found that cover crops can indeed help protect soil from wind erosion, even in semi-arid regions. But success depends on skilled management. The key takeaway was that while cover crops offer real benefits, they also come with challenges, and farmers need to use them strategically to see results. In other words, yes, cover crops can be beneficial, but the risk of moisture competition is real. If they are not managed well, they can hurt yields. And that's a reasonable concern in dry years or on tougher soils. The article states, some trial results showed cover crops did not compromise yield unless left to grow to a longer growth stage, indicating that careful management is crucial for potential yield benefits. One unexpected result was a yield boost for dry beans when the cover crop, fall rye, was terminated at a specific growth stage. The researchers championed fall rye as a strong option for a fall cover crop. It has the best winter hardiness, protects the soil in the fall, and is a little easier to kill. It was also noted that flea beetle damage was less in the plots with cover crops. The researchers also spoke about the benefits of cover crops in creating macropores and improving moisture retention. That brings me to this week's guest, Gavelin from Gavelin Farms. Calvin's success story is all about overcoming those moisture limitations by simply tweaking his seeding depth. He explains how getting his cover crop seed in a little deeper than his main cash crop transformed everything. That small adjustment meant that the cover crop didn't overcompete with his main crop. Hey, Calvin, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you on here to chat with our listeners. To get started here, why don't we just go through some getting to know you a little bit. Can you tell us your name, your farm name, where you're located, and a little bit about your farm?
Okay. My name is Gavelin. My wife and myself, we operate Gavelin Farms. We are located at McCord, Saskatchewan. So to give everybody a perspective, we're in the heart of the Palliser Triangle, 30 miles north of the U.S.-Canadian border. And if you look on a map between the east block and west block of the Grasslands National Park, I'd be basically in the center of it.
Okay. So you are right out on the open prairie.
As open as you get. South of me is the bench where the glaciers last pushed. So I get to see what Mother Nature can do at its best and sometimes at its worst.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a really picturesque landscape to be farming in.
It is very picturesque. Quite dry these last 9 years. Dry, but that's when we switched to regenerative farming practices, and that has seemed to be the answer to some of our issues that were going on.
Excellent. Yeah, let's dive into that. So my question is always, how did you find regenerative farming? What was your kickoff point for that?
I guess our kickoff point came in 2018 when I was walking across the yard, and it just, a thought came to me. And I got to the house and I said to my wife, I'm dumb. She said, what did you do now? I said, well, it's not what I did, it's been what I've been doing. I said, we've been killing our soils for since they've been homesteaded because we're not having any living roots in them year round. Because that year it was dry and you'd go out there and wherever the soils were open, it was just baked right off. And yet whenever you'd go out to the prairie and you'd have vegetation, and that day it was 42 above the day before, and I was out haying, went out to the prairie, and you had the diversity of the stands and everything, and it was cool underneath there, and those plants were still green, and what I've been farming was burnt up.
Wow. So
what we did after that, in 2019, we took a one-day grazing course by Holistic Management. A friend of mine said it would probably be interesting for me to attend, and that day was an eye-opener, and we started in 2019 with our first cover crop. It was basically, we used our bin seed that we had and bought some hairy vetch and tillage radish. It was a simple blend, but that on July 12th that year, we had 100% hail on everything. Landed after that is, the realization is there's no insurance. I couldn't get crop insurance. I couldn't get hail insurance on this stuff. And I could see why everybody wasn't doing it, because you're at the mercy of Mother Nature. But what that cover crop surprised the dickens out of me with was it fed our whole 200 cow herd all winter long, right from October through till February. It came back after that hail. Our derm crops, our monoculture derm crops, didn't come back. They were about a foot to 16 inches tall, and we had to bale them because the season was coming in, and this cover crop just kept growing, and it was basically chest high.
What? Chest high?
And with the diverse chest high. So we have pictures of that swath that we were making. It was grass green, and left after the hail was oats, barley, tillage radish, And what I didn't realize, it worked in synergy, and it just grew and grew, and it covered the ground, and then had protection and kept the moisture, and it used the nutrients that were there, and it was unbelievable. We were swathing in September, and if anybody around, we got a foot of snow at the middle of September that year, and fall came in early and hard. And we had to swath it, and just gut-wrenching, thinking you were losing it again. And it was the first time we ever swath grazed, and it was the best move that we ever did.
Wow.
And what we found, we were always told it would. When I tried it, I was told by everybody, it won't work in here, you're too dry. It's something that is only ideal for wet conditions. But little did you know, every time we tried it, it worked. In 2021, when Western Canada was in the hardest, the severity of the drought, and we were classified as level 5. So everything was burnt off, our pastures, our hayfield was gone by the middle of June, and we planted 3 different cover crops that year. And when our pastures were gone, well, we said the only thing we could do, so we paddock grazed our 2 blends of our cover crops, and it got us through that year. And our other one was a fall customized blend that we got created, and with the help of Kevin Elmy. And so that year, everything was gone. Our peas were less than 2 bushels, durum was under a bushel, and lentils were a quarter of a bushel an acre measured by crop insurance. And these 2 fields of cover crops that we were grazing fed our cows, and it didn't make sense why they were still surviving when our monocultures were dead. And what we had happen that year, which we never even thought of, is it created super ovulation when we had the cows being bred on those fields, because they had the diversity of nutrients. And it just opened up our eyes to what we've been missing.
Wow. That is just night and day difference.
And so we asked specialists to come out to our place, and they're like, well, there's nothing out there. And it's like, well, could you please come? I said, you won't believe me if you don't see it. And so they came out to our place in October the 1st, and the last cover crop that we had left was waist high, grass green, full in flower yet, and in the sunflower heads you would just see all these bees nestled in the flower heads, and you could just hear the life in the field.
Wow.
And those 2 specialists that were out there, they're like, and you might have read this and other stuff, they called it an oasis in the middle of a desert. That was their term, how they termed that field. And it was unbelievable. They said, how did these 88 acres survive when the whole country around was burnt out and brown? And so that has led us to doing this all the time.
Yeah, you say specialists. What do you mean by specialists? Are they from a university or just a crop company?
So those 2 people were, it was Terry Kowalczyk with Saskatchewan Food. They were their cover crop specialist. And the other one was Dunling Wong. He is their organic specialist for Saskatchewan Food that Terry brought along. And ever since that, it was amazing when Terry was out there walking the field, and they couldn't believe it. The diversity of life, and the diversity of insects, and the diversity of plants that were out there. So when we swath grazed that field, and in that year, Terry was just blown away. He said, this is the only field for hundreds of miles that's making a profit, because the numbers that he was using into his formula, using the government numbers, it was returning $200 an acre with the amount of grazing days we got off it, and at the cost of grazing. And it's opened us our eyes. We were so proud of taking that first course in 2019. So we took the whole 4-day holistic management course from Ralph Corcoran. And it just, the operation has just got less stressful. Our family's more involved, and it's just something that we never expected. the regenerative, it just seemed like what we were doing before was dividing our family. I was out in the field. We're always just like maxing out synthetics, maxing out chemistries.
Mm-hmm.
And once we went regenerative, it just seemed like the stress was off. We learned, taking our holistic management course, is don't back yourself into the corner. Like, there's other options.
Mm-hmm.
What we found is, like, our cattle side of it was our option out a lot of time. Like, the cows will actually source the feed. The cows will, they like their, so my wife, when she's talking about this, and so we've opened up our farm.
Yeah.
We've had like 200, some years up to 250 people touring through our farm and showing them what cover crops in our area. So in 2022, we had a conference actually in McCord here.
Mm-hmm.
A group of us put it on. And that year I did something that nobody ever thought about doing before. We seeded 9 different blends of cover crops side by side on a 150-acre field. And so those 9 blends were 50 feet wide on a half-mile long, and it was rolling topography.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to see the low spots, the hills, and all that stuff. And then all summer long, we had people tour through it. And then they would say, oh, that's what this supposed to look like, and this species looks like, and this is what it looks like, the blend when it's coming to maturity. And it just gave the people an opportunity, because when you go to a research station, those plots are 10 by 10.
Yes.
Feet in size. You're not seeing the change in topography, what moisture does. And this is what Terry Kowalczyk, when he was out here, when we had the discussion, he said, soils are built over hundreds of thousands of years, and we all take it for granted that when we're looking at a field, it's all the same soil throughout the field. But he says when you go to the topography, the low spots have accumulated the nutrients and built up biomass, and there's just stuff like that that just started to fall in place. And during that holistic management course, our instructor, Ralph Corcoran, he each gave us Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil. And it was like a no-brainer. It's probably something that I've only read like 3 times, and I'll still pick that book up today and get energized. And it's just like what he did is just basically me, like years later.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about soils or his farm and being hailed out. Well, we had like some land that had 5 hailstorms in 7 years. And it was devastating to it, but having waist-high peas getting hailed out and being half the height of a Coke can, it was just the thatch layer that was put on. It was just, those are the things that you never thought of.
Armor on the soil.
Yes. And so now, fast forwarding to what we're doing now, about 70% of our acres are intercropped.
Mm-hmm.
This way, we having...
Oh, sorry to interrupt, but tell me what you mean by intercropped. Is that still, like, how many species together is that?
So on our cereal acres, we run on our durum cereal. We intercrop it. We seed it with winter triticale in the springtime in the same pass. And everybody has shook his head several times why we're doing it. And it was a suggestion by Kevin Elmy. And Kevin Elmy has been very in depth. We had a discussion on the regen and doing different species. By doing that winter triticale with our monoculture durum, it gives us the ability. We don't have to change our fertility if we're doing any in-crop raise.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be changed since triticale is in the wheat family.
Mm-hmm.
But what it does do is about mid-season and so this is 2018, it goes back to that principle,
mm-hmm.
was when I thought we're killing our soil, because a plant is only feeding the roots enzymes when it's in the vegetative mode.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as so that's basically 60 days of the year. And then in the last 30 to 40 days, when it's switching over to seed set and reproduction, it does no longer care about feeding the roots. It's feeding that seed head.
Right.
So when we're going to our winter trit, in the soil, we're having that living root that is active in that off-season length. And most years it's not very productive, and people wonder why we're doing it. But when last year we fed our cows 2 months on it.
Yeah.
After we combined. And then by doing that, then we had the animal integration. It goes back to those regenerative principles. It all worked. And we've been, last year we were blessed to have Understanding Ag. We were the host farm for the Canadian tour.
Yeah.
And so everybody that came out here got to see what we were doing in our context.
Yeah.
Because our context is a lot drier than everybody else's. And so we had cover crop companies and all that stuff out here looking. And they've duplicated in a lot of the stuff what we were doing out here. Yeah. And I don't care if what is doing good for our farm, everybody might as well learn the same thing.
Yeah.
Instead of
win-win. You want to show everybody this is possible.
Yes. And so those people that came out here, and they were from all over Western Canada, but they got to see how dry it was. When Blaine Heinrichs came out here, prior to it, the thing, him and Mike Tilley came out the fall before because they had heard about me using this winter trit, and they were so excited to see it and to see the benefits of it. And so the next year we were showing it, plus all our cover cropping and the different blends that we seed, and it just gave everybody the total package and how it worked with our cattle and our farming operation. And we're not a big operation. We only farm about 4,000 acres, seed about 1,800 a year, and the rest is all used for the cattle. But the diversity of having the cows in our place has always been questionable. Like some years cows pay for themselves here, some they don't. But it's bringing the animal integration onto these fields. That's where you see the nutrients getting recycled back for the soil biological organisms. They use it so much better than letting it rot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so then when COVID hit in 2000, and COVID shut down the killing plants in Alberta, we were backgrounding our steers, and we had semi-loads of steers getting ready to go to slaughter, and they were supposed to leave on that Tuesday when they closed the plant on Saturday. And it's like, what do we do? So then we reached out to our local abattoir and booked in 4 head a week for the next 10 weeks. And that was a different side of our operation we had never done before. So we've been doing farm to fork ever since.
Wow. So COVID actually was the
tripping point.
That direction. Yeah.
Yes. And everybody said it was impossible, and it just worked. And we feed them cover crops, and everybody's like, their comment is, it tastes differently than everybody else's, and they like it. And I said, it's the diversity. And so this is where my wife's comment comes in when people are talking about our cover crops. And she said, well, as humans, when we go to a salad bar, do we just eat lettuce? No, we pick and choose what we think we need along the way. So as a cow grazes, and I never knew this, and I've been raised the whole life around cows, but when you watch them, the cows selectively graze out in that field to what she wants. She doesn't just mob graze.
No.
She just handpicks her diet. And so offering her right in front of it, it is amazing watching those cows. I can feed them a bale of hay, the best hay, and whatever they want. And then I bring a bale of cover crop, and those cows will just stop, and they all come over and clean that cover crop up first, and then go back.
Because it has other nutrients that they're craving. Is that what you're
saying? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And smells and flavors.
Yeah. It's just more appealing because it's variety.
So right now, our cover crop, every year we seed a cover crop just because that seems to be our risk management. And so our species when we're seeding a cover crop, we have 2 different types of cover crops that we seed. One is a perennial blend.
Yeah.
So that perennial blend will be a 19 to 20 species blend, about 20 pounds of barley with it, or oats. And what that blend does, so we seed it down, and in year one, the blend is basically 7 different species of annuals the first year, 7 species of biannuals the second year that will develop, and year 3, the perennials, which is about 6 species, so that's where we get the 20 species number, is set up, and then it's a perennial hayfield after that. So when the first time we planted this and it cost us $84 an acre, everybody looked at me like I had 2 heads. And on that first covered tour that we had 200, there was 125 people on a bus tour coming through.
Yeah.
And there was I guess 75 in the bus, because there was a van behind it. And they're out in the field, and there's a news reporter out there, and she's like, everybody's like, $85 an acre. And she looked at me and she said, "That's cheap." And they all looked at her and they said, "What do you mean it's cheap?" Well, if he just said you get 10 years out of this one seeding, it only cost him $88.50 an acre to seed it, instead of seeding all these annual cover crops year after year and pumping another $80 an acre into it, and then another $80 an acre the next year.
She saw the math, the way it actually worked out.
And it was like, I'm not arguing with you. She just proved the benefits of seeding it once, getting multiple years out of it. And what we found by putting these cover crops into our ecosystem, and this is where it has blown nutrient and all that stuff, because they do all our soil testing. So it was third party. Like, we weren't pushing anything. So that first cover crop that we had planted in the drought of 2021, when they were out here with the rest of the crop gone, they were like, "Oh, we had some rain, but that durum stubble that's got no weeds on it, that's a foot tall, that's all mature, well, there should be moisture in that ground." So they'd go trying to probe. Well, it was solid, because any rains that we had already had evaporated out. And they went over to that cover crop and they said, "Oh, this waist high green stuff that's in end of September shouldn't be very moisture, because this plants are all using it." Well, that probe just went, usually they struggle to get to a foot. It just went to whatever length they wanted.
Wow.
And just pulled up in moist, because it had the solar panels of all those different plants, their leaves, was capturing sunlight but shading the ground. So when we had a tour a couple years ago and we were out there, and I said, "Did you guys ever take an infrared thermometer out to the field?" And they're like, "No." So we had researchers from the research station in Swift Current out there, and I said, it was, that daytime temperature was 38 above. And the night before, it never got below 35. So everything was smoking hot. And so where we were on bare ground, that temperature would be up to 52 degrees. And then into that durum stubble that had the winter trit, it was sitting about 45, because it still was open, because because the industry has gone to seeding to get through trash. They go wider and wider row spacing, so we're leaving more open soil to heat up in between the rows. But we went to our cover crop, it was 26 degrees.
What?
And the researcher looked down, and it's like, that's impossible. And there's one of the ladies that were on the tour, and she was about 8 months pregnant. She said, "No, I laid in it. It's 26 degrees.
Oh, wow. It's so counterintuitive, isn't it? Because often what I've still been hearing from news reports, like, say, through the Western producers, that the general consensus of most farmers is that cover crops aren't possible because they don't have enough moisture to grow more plants. But it's actually so counterintuitive that when you have more plants, you actually save that moisture, and you give yourself, you use the water so much more efficiently.
But some of these guys, I guess, I don't do things like everybody else. I will be honest and upfront with that.
Mhm.
Like when I'm seeding my cover crops, I'm seeding it. I have a split row system on our drill.
Mhm.
Usually I band my fertilizer to the side and put my cereals down the center of the main one. And so when I'm seeding cover crops, I'm seeding it at 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch, seeding the cover crops in that shallow, but then I'm putting that 20 pounds of cereal into that furrow ridge where the fertilizer is usually placed, so then you got a little bit of extra dirt. So nobody thinks that 1 inch of separation does anything for your soils. But if you put all those seeds in the same trench, your cereals are going to outcompete your cover crops, and then you're basically self-killing them off because you've put your seeding rate's going to outkill it. That 1 inch, when it's a seedling, it makes a huge difference for competition.
Mhm. So
And so when we,
an important thing is that you seed them at different depths.
yes,
Mhm. That's a really
and
good component.
so in our drought ecosystem, everybody, lots of guys will shake their head at me. You seeded this a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch? Yep. And you should seed it down to moisture. I said, no, the moisture will come to it. Because the deeper I work, the more I dry my seed bed down. So we're seeding really shallow. And in 9 years of drought, I've never not had a cover crop.
Really? Now that's fascinating.
And so that year with the researchers, there was about 35 of them. It was a Living Labs tour. And they were like, it was chest high, that cover crop. And when they were getting up to biomass, they were pushing 8,400 pounds of biomass when they were doing their calculations. And they're like, this is unbelievable. And they said, well, it doesn't work in our ecosystem. And I said, well, it should work everywhere. It's just you guys are doing it wrong. Like, so when I talked to them, I said, well, some of them are, well, we got to till this and then we got to harrow this. And I said, well, nobody's going to have time to do 4 different applications in the field. I said, well, you've got to try to be a little more smart about it. But I said, you also got to take your time. Like, so when we're seeding this stuff, I'm at like 3.5 miles an hour. So then I'm not throwing dirt. It's painstakingly, the day that I seed the cover crops, it's like torture watching nothing get done. But months later, you reap the rewards.
Ah, yep. You just got to give it time. Oh,
Most of our cover crops have always been germinated on 2/10 of rain.
really? Could you say that again?
2/10 of moisture, 5 mils,
Your cover.
is most, and that's what it'll germinate in. 21, we had 7/10 of moisture during our growing season.
Wow, that was it. Everything. That was your total rain for the entire season.
Yep, until the 15th of August.
Wow.
That stuff survived on 7/10.
Did you have any moisture from snow going into the spring?
That year, anything planted after the 15th of May didn't germinate.
Wow.
Like, it was hot and windy that spring, and it just created such a negative, I guess, outlook. Like, because when the native plants aren't starting and your grass isn't starting, like, you're just backed into a corner.
I talked with Calvin for about an hour, but it feels like it's just too long to fit onto this one episode, so I'll be saving the other half of our conversation for next week. In the next episode, we'll dive into how cover crop grazing has drastically improved conception rates in his cattle herd, how other farmers react when they see his farm, and how regenerative practices have lowered his farm debt and improved his mental health by giving him more time with his family. We'll also talk about how his family became more involved in the regenerative work, like moving cattle more often, which has made a big difference, both on the farm and at home. So stay tuned for next week's episode. You won't want to miss the second half of the story. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Regenerative Farming News. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast and share it with your friends, family, and fellow farmers. Every share helps spread the word about regenerative agriculture. And if you want to continue the conversation, You can find us on Facebook and Instagram, where I post updates, resources, and stories from the field. Together, we can grow healthier soil, stronger farms, and a more resilient future.